All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking what I like to call the evolutionary twist in attraction. We're going to look at the incredibly quirky, highly predictable, and honestly kind of mind-blowing ways our own brains deceive us when it comes to human attraction, physical beauty, and romantic intent. Seriously, prepare to rethink literally every first impression you have ever had.
So, picture this. You're at a social gathering. Someone across the room catches your eye and shoots you a warm smile. Or, maybe you're talking, and they offer a friendly, lingering touch on the arm. Now, is that just simple politeness, or are they sending a romantic signal? Well, spoiler alert, you're probably guessing wrong. It turns out human beings are rarely objective observers of intent. When we navigate social interactions, our brains are heavily influenced by ancient biases that skew our perceptions in some absolutely fascinating ways.
Let's start with how we actually process beauty. Ever heard of the halo effect? It's basically the beauty bias. This happens when we let one positive trait, like physical attractiveness, completely spill over into our judgments about totally unrelated traits. Because of this cognitive bias, a good first impression quietly becomes hard evidence in our brains of someone's honesty, their kindness, or their intelligence. And studies actually show this has real-world consequences. It leads to more lenient treatment for attractive defendants in courtrooms, and it gives good-looking job applicants a massive, unearned advantage in hiring. It's wild. And then, oh man, there's the cheerleader effect. This is another everyday shortcut, where a face is actually judged as more attractive when you see it in a group compared to when it's just seen all alone. We essentially average out the faces in a crowd, which artificially boosts the perceived attractiveness of the individuals. And this reveals something really incredible about human cognition. It shows just how sparse our internal representation of the visual world really is. We are not processing every detail objectively. We're relying on mental workarounds.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what these mental workarounds actually are. We shouldn't just think of these cognitive biases as random mistakes or broken thought processes. They're actually systematic errors rooted in heuristics. Heuristics are basically predictable mental shortcuts our brains use to process information quickly. Instead of evaluating everything objectively, which, let's be honest, would take way too much brain power, our minds just use these shortcuts, even when it leads us right into inaccurate or totally irrational thinking. When we apply this to the chaotic world of mating and attraction, these mental shortcuts usually spit out two specific types of errors. A type 1 error is a false positive. In the dating world, this is falsely believing someone is romantically interested in you when actually they're just being nice. A type 2 error is a false negative. This is when you completely miss a real, genuine romantic signal from someone who actually is interested in you. So why does our brain set us up to fail like this? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at error management theory, or EMT. EMT is the core framework here. It proposes that these cognitive errors aren't just modern glitches. Instead, they're the result of adaptive biases that exist today because they gave humans massive survival and reproductive advantages in the past. In short, your brain is fundamentally designed to make the least costly arrow for survival. When faced with uncertainty, your brain is quickly weighing a missed opportunity against wasted effort, and it automatically chooses the safer evolutionary bet.
If we look at how this breaks down by gender, it brilliantly illustrates how those evolutionary bets completely differ between men and women based on the asymmetry of their biological costs. For ancestral men, the highest evolutionary cost was a missed sexual opportunity. This resulted in a bias called sexual overperception. For ancestral women, though, the highest cost was falsely inferring a mate's commitment, which could lead to highly costly abandonment, and that resulted in a bias called commitment skepticism.
Let's zoom in on the men first. Sexual overperception bias is a man's tendency to over-infer sexual intent from really minimal cues. By overestimating a woman's sexual interest from something as simple as a smile, men minimize the highly costly evolutionary risk of missing out on a reproductive opportunity. And this isn't a conscious choice, it's a documented evolutionary feature. It's been proven time and time again in laboratory speed dating studies where men consistently interpret sexual interest from women way more often than the women actually intended it.
But here's the thing. This overperception isn't static. It actually spikes under specific conditions. Research shows a man's overperception increases if he's recently viewed romantically arousing films, if he has a high self-perceived mate value, meaning a bit of an ego, or if he's actively pursuing a short-term mating strategy. But most crucially, the bias skyrockets if the female target is highly attractive.
From an evolutionary perspective, high physical attractiveness is a cue of fertility, making a missed opportunity with that specific woman even more evolutionarily costly to the ancestral man. Flipping over to the other side, we have commitment skepticism. This is the female counterpart bias. Ancestral women who messed up by falsely inferring a prospective mate's commitment suffered severe reproductive costs. They potentially faced pregnancy and child-rearing completely without support. So to avoid this highly costly abandonment, women evolved intention-reading adaptations that are heavily biased toward underperceiving men's commitment levels. Okay, let's move to how this builds, because here is where the research takes a fascinating narrative twist. We have all these deeply ingrained biological rules governing romantic intent. But what happens when the target is your sibling? Do these deeply ingrained default biases still apply when a man is evaluating, say, a smile from his own sister?
The answer? Absolutely not. Enter the sister effect. This is the brilliant evolutionary exception to the rule. When men evaluate the romantic or sexual intent of their own sisters, that overwhelming sexual overperception bias suddenly just vanishes. It completely and immediately corrects itself.
This isn't just a theory either. It was confirmed in a landmark academic paper by researchers Hazelton and Buss, and their data is striking. They found that a man's perception of his sister's sexual intent actually falls perfectly between women's own self-perceptions and women's perceptions of other women. Basically, instead of over-sexualizing the cues like they normally would, men suddenly become remarkably, objectively accurate at reading their sister's true intentions. And just to give you an idea of how solid this data is, the cross-sex sibling perception instrument used in the study had a reliability score of 0.87. In statistical terms, that is a massive foundation. It proves the sister effect isn't just a fluke, it's a measurable, highly consistent psychological phenomenon. So why the sudden clarity? It basically comes down to shared fate logic. As the researchers put it, men who recognized their sisters upset when their intentions were misread may have been better able to protect their sister's ability to exercise choice in mating. Ancestral men obviously shared genes with their sisters. They desperately needed to accurately read their siblings to protect their kin's reputation and shield them from unwanted advances. Doing that indirectly protected the replication of their own shared genes. Right now, there are two main evolutionary hypotheses for why this sudden accuracy actually occurs. On one side is adaptive bias protection. That's the idea we just discussed, where men accurately read their kin to actively protect them. But on the other side is an incest avoidance mechanism. This hypothesis suggests humans naturally and completely shut down sexualized perceptions of their siblings simply to prevent inbreeding. As a byproduct of completely shutting down that sexualized lens, the overperception bias just naturally vanishes. And guess what? The researchers found that this sibling correction is not just a male phenomenon. Women do the exact same thing in reverse. The study revealed that women radically underestimate their brother's sexual intent, dropping their perceptions far, far below all baseline criterion measures. The heavy evolutionary biases we naturally apply to strangers completely break down the second we are within the bounds of the family unit. So the crucial point is, how do we apply this evolutionary history to our modern lives? When you're out there trying to read someone's signals, run through these rules of thumb. Ask yourself, am I judging based on a cognitive shortcut like the halo effect? Is this a true signal of intent, or is my brain just frantically trying to avoid an ancient evolutionary cost, like a missed opportunity or abandonment? We really have to remember that our default impressions are rarely objective reality. They are ancient heuristics that were designed for survival.
Which brings us right to our final question. The next time you catch someone's eye across a room, interpret a friendly gesture, or judge a book by its incredibly attractive cover, you have to stop and ask yourself, are your default impressions really guided by objective reality, or are they just ancient evolutionary shortcuts running quietly in the background? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep questioning the way you see the world, and I will see you next time.